Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Killoy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast.
Welcome back to Military Veteran Dad Fatherhood Friday. Guys, I'm your host, Ben Killoy, dropping on the mic, and today I'm going to bring you some cold, hard truth, but not to every dad. I want to pick one specific dad out there who listens to this podcast, who feels empty inside, but it doesn't acknowledge it, and on the outside looks like everything is perfect in his life. And he answers a question, how you doing today? With good, with fine. But the thing to remember with good and fine is most people who answer that are not good, nor are they fine. But before I want to dive in, I want to tell a little dad humor. So this not you, but you type idea was actually inspired by the movie Home, which in our household, we call it the Boov movie, because essentially this alien race called the Boov take over Earth. They're a bunch of little purple aliens, and the chief Boov points out in one particular scene, not the purple one, the other purple one, this purple one, that purple one, this purple one, that purple, and it eventually narrows down to this individual purple one, which are all kind of just lightly shaded different kinds of purple. And if you've seen the movie Home, you know exactly the scene I'm talking about. That moment where the chief Boov points out to that one individual purple one, that's the kind of thing that I'm doing tonight. I'm talking directly to that dad, because that dad that looks okay on the outside, that dresses up with good and fine every day, that dad needs to admit that something's wrong. Because what I've learned over the entire time of this podcast, and we're coming up on to episode 100 of the interview shows, and we have almost done the Fatherhood Friday for an entire year. I know there are hard truths when it comes to being a military veteran dad that this particular dad needs to hear, and maybe he hasn't heard them in the way that I'm going to say it today. So I'm going to talk to him. So what I need you to understand is that all the things that you say in your head, all the different things that you say are making things okay. You might even be thinking that this podcast isn't for you. You might even be saying, I just don't always sync up with some of the things that Ben calls out and that he talks about. You might even have had the balls in your head to think that you're above what we talk about in this podcast, that you already know it all. But here is the cold, hard truth. And I haven't really said it this bluntly, but a conversation today really inspired me to dive in and knife hand this information to that dad in particular. All of that crap that you tell yourself is bullshit. All of it. All of that is your ego. Ego is one of the very first fundamental things that a veteran in particular has to turn off. Because to survive, our brain used our ego, used all of the protection mechanisms that have kept us alive as a human race for millennia to survive in the battlefield, to survive in an environment where we had to turn off a lot of our emotions. And our ego helped us get there through those moments where we needed to turn off, kick in the adrenaline, and achieve mission accomplishment. That ego is what's preventing you from coming home today, walking through that door and feeling like a doormat versus a father. Because you can feel success in all the different areas of your life, but if you walk through that door and you feel like a doormat, but don't acknowledge it, you're going to have a pit inside that keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's that pit that dads fall into, that we no longer can see what matters, that we come to logical bullshit conclusions that our family is better without us, and that somehow by taking our own life, we're ending the pain. But all we're doing is passing on the pain that we feel inside. It is your ego that is going to hold you back, is going to prevent you from feeling what your kids are feeling, what you need to feel. All of that is your ego. Your ego is one of those things that is always resisting growth. It wants its warm and comfort zone. It wants things to be familiar. And it's always going to try to come up with different reasons why you should go back to feeling familiar. I can't tell you how many times my ego has played a role in my growth and pulling me back. Because for almost 30 years of me being alive on this earth, I was a particular type of person. And it's only in the last 5 that I've really started to define it. So my brain remembers very vividly what it was like for those first 30 years, living those different things, having these certain truths be true every day in order to wake up and go to work. But I had to start calling bullshit on those different things. And every time I've been able to push through something and get through it. Because you can justify anything in your head. You can justify that ice cream and Oreos is worth it because you had a hard day at work, and maybe it's not ice cream and Oreos. Maybe it's a beer. Maybe it's your ego saying, you know what? A beer has always been that one thing that kind of helps you calm down at night. You had a long day. Have that beer. But maybe that beer that you have is something that keeps going. Maybe that beer is something that you continue as a trend. The next thing you know, you might be getting divorced because you become an alcoholic. That ego was just trying to find familiarity. And we didn't have the consciousness to realize that we could push back, that we had a choice through all of it, that we didn't have to do it the way that we were doing it. But your ego wants you to go back there. Because what your ego knows true in your heart is that you have shit in your shadows. The things that you do not talk about at dinner parties, whether that be a friend that died in Iraq or Afghanistan, and you got to come home and he didn't. Maybe it wasn't one friend, maybe it was 10 friends. Those things, those feelings that scare the living hell out of you just thinking about them, those things scare you inside. And dealing with them, going through that darkness, that shadow, is not something that's comfortable. It is not something that's easy, which is why your ego is always trying to keep that shit inside your shadows. And as long as it's in the shadows, it can kind of create this persona of everything being okay. Look, everything that's in the light is perfect. Lo and behold, 80% of your own circle is in a darkness, and you're only living a life of 20% that's in the light. Imagine a person that's living 20% in the light and he hides everything else who he is. Think of that person, of how much they're on autopilot. And I bet that's you. Not the other purple one, this purple one. The one that I'm talking to tonight that doesn't acknowledge and comes up with all these BS reasons of why things are the way they are, and that it's perfectly okay being the way they are. And I'm all about giving someone grace and understanding that everybody's trying, especially that 2020. Nobody's been trying more than me. I've been trying in different ways, and life just keeps throwing different things at me. But I keep going. I keep going and going and going, and I keep changing, because nothing changes if nothing changes. What you don't realize, and what the ego doesn't let you see, is that you need other people in your life to move forward. You're not meant to go through that darkness alone. You had a tribe when you were in the military. You had a brother that had your six, that you knew if you had to go into battle and you had to move up to that house to scout it out and see what was up there, you knew there was someone behind you that had your six. But right now, wherever you're listening to this podcast episode, you feel alone. You feel that if you go into that darkness, you might not come out because you don't know what's in there. And that scares the living hell out of you. And I want to tell you that that's okay. This is where the grace comes in. Acknowledging that that scares you, that is a very human thing. It's not ego. That's not anything. That's an emotion. Something we probably haven't felt in a long time, if you're this dad that I'm talking to. But it's perfectly fine to be scared. But you have to admit that to yourself, because if you don't admit that to yourself, you're living a lie every day that everything's okay and good and fine. But it's not. What you have to remember is that being a man, especially in 2020, it works when we lean in, when we put our ego aside and we engage with life, but not just engage with the work and the nonsense. Engage with your family. Engage with a brotherhood. Maybe that's not the military. Maybe you are a veteran and you're on the other side of transition and you're no longer serving in the military. Find that tribe. Because what anybody knows, if they have a tribe to do life with, and I'm not talking about drinking a beer and sharing the ESPN news from that day. I'm talking about someone that if that person's going through divorce, everybody in that tribe has their back. That tribe will help get you through what that darkness is. Because 9 times out of 10, someone in your tribe has already walked through that darkness. They already know where the booby traps are. They already know where the landmines are. And they already know where the claymores are. But you can't do it alone. And that's the biggest lie that we tell ourselves. Because what I've learned in the last 5 years is that there's this crazy thing that happens. If I were to rewind my life to about 4.5 years ago, I was at a point where I was climbing the mountain just like everybody else does. I was going to school. I had started a family. I had a job. I was doing everything. We had a house. And I felt like I was climbing out a mountain and I was stuck. And I looked up and I felt like there was this halo cloud around the mountain that prevented me from seeing anything higher. And when I looked down, all I could see was the shit that I was still holding on to, that I wasn't really acknowledging, that I was still carrying with. The shit that's in the darkness. That stuff that's there, that shit you're holding on to, the cloud that's above your head, it's scary. You might be 2,000 feet up on this mountain and you're looking down like, man, if I fall, I'm bouncing, because it's a long fucking way down. Then you look up and you're like, man, I don't even know where to go. I don't even know if there is a top because I can't see through these clouds. But what you don't know is that cloud only comes when you're standing still. When you are not engaging with your life in a way that's growth, in a way that's moving forward and building a better tomorrow, a better you, that cloud just sits there. And what you don't know about relationships, and there's been a few people in my life that have been a hand that has reached out of that cloud and reached down to me and give me that feeling like I had in the Marine Corps. I got your back. Give me your hand, and they pull me up. I've always said, I did a special Fatherhood Friday on it a couple months ago about a barrel of monkeys mindset, being one hand up and one hand down. And that's what that is when someone reaches down through the cloud to grab a fellow brother who's struggling to help lift him up. But what you don't remember, and what I don't remember either in that moment of looking behind me, is there were so many other men still climbing. I could have easily been that hand for someone else, because there's always someone ahead of you and there's always someone behind you. We were never meant to do life alone. That's why I repeat over and over. If it hasn't sunk in and you've listened to the podcast, you're not picking up the right vibe, because I've repeated more times than I can count that for millennia, men survived in a tribe. It's only in the last 200 years that we really thought we could do it alone. It's never been more apparent in the amount of men committing suicide, in the amount of veterans committing suicide, the amount of fathers committing suicide, that men need tribes. We were never designed to do it alone, and it is a guarantee that life will give you more than you can handle. So I'm going to go back to you. I've just pulled the veil back and ripped off your Band-Aid that you hold on, you're good and fine, and I've just exposed the scab. It probably fucking hurts. I hope it does a little, because that pain that you feel right now, that is a moment where you could actually think back from this moment in the future. I want you to do an exercise with me. If you're the dad that I'm talking to, imagine yourself on October 9th, 2021. and you look behind you on the mountain that you're climbing, and that shit that you're holding on to isn't there. You cut that cord a long time ago. You consistently can see higher on the mountain of where you're headed. You can consistently look behind you and enjoy the view, which is your family that you're building every single day when you show up as a dad. And when you look down, you consistently see men behind you that you're able to help and show the way. Because like I said before, that shit in your darkness is scary. It's frightening. But someone has gone through it before. And you can help someone else go through it as well. Just like someone, hopefully, on October 9th, 2021, helped you get through. Because guys, that version of you, the particular dad I'm talking to on October 9th, 2021, imagine how you would feel on that day, a year from now, if all of that shit that I just said came true. Imagine the connection that you could feel with your kids. Imagine the feeling that you're going to have with your wife. Imagine the amazing sex and connection that you would have with your wife when your mind is no longer worried about someone noticing the shadows of your life, when you're no longer worried about contending with the emotions that maybe you're feeling in the middle of having sex with your wife, whatever it may be. Imagine that feeling of how good October 9th, 2021 feels. And now imagine today, October 9th, 2020, a year filled with entire balls of shit that nobody saw coming. Imagine that year that we've had this year. And you look back a year from now and say, you know what? October 9th, 2020, that was the day that I cut the fucking cord on my shit. I decided to go through the darkness. I maybe reached out to a counselor to help me through. I reached out to a friend who I know went through this. And today is the day that changed everything. That October 9th, 2020 is a date that you remember forever. Just like my January 27th, I've kind of coined as my alive day. Just like people who survive IEDs coin their alive days. Every day after January 27th is bonus for me because I feel more alive now after January 27th than I have my entire life. And I needed that day to happen to get me to the point where I'm at today. And this could be your day. October 9th, 2020 could be the day that changed everything for you because you acknowledged the dad that I'm talking to. You pulled back the shit and said, you know what? That's me. And today's the last day I ever get labeled as the dad that's hiding. The dad that doesn't acknowledge what he's acknowledging, that he needs to acknowledge. And the dad that said, I'm going to go home, love my kids, love my wife, and never look back and continue to grow and be the best fucking dad I could be. If you've heard me talk on the podcast a lot, I've often said, your friend died in Iraq and Afghanistan, so you could come home and be the best fucking dad you could be. If that dad, that friend that you lost was a dad, there's a dad out there that no longer gets to hug their kids, no longer gets to feel the connection with his wife. You do. To honor his legacy of what the gift that he gave you, to come home and hug your kids, you need to recognize October 9th is that day to turn, to make sure that every day you live a life worth remembering that sacrifice that our friends and brothers gave us. It doesn't matter if you lost a friend. I live and connect with my kids in a way, hopefully, that I'm living up to the life that those dads never got to have. Because that's what it's about, guys. And so you, the dad I'm talking to, think about this. What are you holding on to? Can you cut it today? And what does your October 9th, 2021 look like? Guys, I'm going to sign off, and I will talk to you guys again on Monday.